Okay, we are broadcasting. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we are concluding our three-part series about Tom Cruise, talking about his movies from the year 2000 on, with a specific focus on three films that we chose to be representative of this time period: Minority Report, Collateral, and American Made. So, as we did last time, I think for our structure, we will kind of gently march through all of his movies from this time period, touching on each of them, but only getting into detail for our three highlighted movies. With that said, any general thoughts before we just begin moving through?
No, I mean, because all of my general thoughts are related to the
Yep.
films or the time period for
Yep.
Tom Cruise.
Mm-hmm. So, our first movie that came out in the year 2000 was Mission Impossible 2. And this was 4 years after the first Mission Impossible, and a different director, very different style from the first movie.
Very
Um,
different director.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, and it's interesting because John Woo is certainly not a nobody, right? Like there were a lot of people. He hadn't done a whole lot of American films at that point, I don't think. What? Let's. I'm gonna look up really quick what he had done up before Mission Impossible 2, because he did a few American movies, and I'm. Let's see. Um, oh yeah, so Broken Arrow, Hard Target, Face Off were all before Mission Impossible 2. So this
yes.
he had done a few already, but I think none of them were achieving quite the same level of success that he had enjoyed in Hong Kong. But it Mission Impossible 2 wasn't a an obvious thing, right? Like we can tell by the fact that it took 4 years after the first one, and it was a very different team. Probably just because I, without having necessarily looked it all up, my guess was that Brian De Palma was not interested in doing another one.
Yeah, that would make sense too, just because that's not Brian De Palma's like. That's just not how he
Hmm.
like his style just doesn't lend itself to sequels, right?
I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not sure there's even one other movie of his that's based on like an existing IP as opposed to just some script he's got. But in any case, though, we've talked about the Mission Impossible movies in detail. But moving into sequel territory, this is Tom Cruise's first sequel, right?
So Brian De Palma directed Carrie,
Oh, okay, so well, that's I
but
mean,
but it's not a franchise, so you're right. Yeah.
right, and I guess it's adapting a screenplay from a book versus from like a TV show.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a number of yeah, so he has a number of screenplays from books like
Well, also Carrie
Fire of
was
the
like
Vanities.
15 years earlier than that too, right?
It was, but Bonfire of the Vanities was in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Carlito's Way was in the 90s. Those I think were both books.
Mm-hmm.
The Black Dahlia is obviously, but yeah, you're right. Nothing else to your point. This is the only serialized franchise that he tackled, so
Mm-hmm.
it does make sense that he wouldn't have an interest in being a part of that. He would want to move on to another project based on his career history. So
Right.
anyway,
But
um,
doing a Mission Impossible sequel does actually feel very much like the first step in the direction of that we will see Cruise continue on throughout this period of time, right? Because what did we finish the '90s with? Is when he's working with all of the big fancy directors. He did Eyes Wide Shut with Kubrick. He did Jerry Maguire with Cameron Crowe. I guess Cameron Crowe wasn't necessarily a big shot director. He had done some good things, but Magnolia with Paul Thomas Anderson, and
The
so
Firm, Sidney Pollack.
yeah, and so he was experimenting with like fancier directors, right? Like
Yeah,
cinema, uh, that sort of thing, films. But it seems like with Mission Impossible 2, uh, I think he'd gotten a taste for liking the action of that, and also moving into a little bit more genre territory generally. Because what do we get? We get after that the next movie is Vanilla Sky, which is also with Cameron Crowe, although certainly that's a change in direction for Cameron Crowe as well.
Yes.
Um, and Vanilla Sky, I haven't watched since I saw it in the theater. I recall it being interesting, but perhaps imperfectly executed. Although at the same time, I'm not off the top of my head sure what would have made it better. It's just a very strange story. I don't know. I haven't seen it in a long time though.
I haven't either, but I have the same recollection that you do.
Mm-hmm.
So
But it's sort of a very trippy story, but that it's like it is sci-fi, but it's sci-fi in kind of a low-key way, meaning it's not doing a lot of big special effects. There's no like spaceships or robots or anything that looks obviously strange or science fictiony on screen. It's mostly just learning. There's a whole subplot about like cryogenics and virtual reality sort of things in there, I believe, at the end. Dreamlike.
yep.
But then coming up in 2002, Minority Report with Steven Spielberg. Um, and that is like, that's full fledged action sci fi, right? Spielberg directed, right? So that's obviously one we're going to talk about. And, you know, even before we went through and made our list of which movies we're going to watch and talk about, I basically said, I'm going to vote that we should do Minority Report because I had just rewatched it. so,
Yes.
so it's actually been a few weeks now because I watched it before we even picked our lists that we are going to do. But I'd say for the most part holds up really well with just a few details that are more interesting to look back on as opposed. It's not like that they aged poorly. It's more just like having more time gone by lets us look at some of the science fiction details differently.
Yes. So, but I think it's also important to say that this definitely carries over from your point about Mission Impossible 2, where he's working with big directors, but then he works with a big action director or an action director who's trying to become big in the US. But Wu was meant to become a big director.
Mm-hmm.
His style just didn't seem to work. Either way, that's maybe another series.
Yeah.
But then you get to this big director, big movie, sci-fi action, and this just catapults like what Tom Cruise in the 2000 plus becomes.
Right. Right.
Right. This one launches this is the launching pad for where he goes with this. And that's why, we purposely chose this one, not because you obviously you rewatched it. It's a good movie, but it is putting things in that direction. So this essentially sets the stage for the remainder of the Mission Impossibles,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the Jack Reachers and the Edge of Tomorrows and all that type of stuff. And so that's purposely why we didn't choose those, because they're all byproducts of what this movie sets up,
Right.
right?
I think that it's actually very easy to see this movie as an inflection point in his portrayal of Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossibles 1 and 2 to 3.
Yes. This
Uh,
is the style of character that Ethan Hunt is in 3.
right, because this is the first. So, as we saw, for example, in Magnolia, he had been willing to play characters who were not just cool guys or just good guys, right? It's not like he restricted himself to that. Like we didn't rewatch Eyes Wide Shut, but his character is, pretty nuanced in that too, right? So it's not like he had rigid rules about what kind of characters he allowed himself to play. Not like actually just if I made just a very brief tangent, I just rewatched the movie of Misery in conjunction with also having read that book for the first time, and I was doing some research on it, and apparently a whole lot of the difficulty they had in casting the Ryder character, who eventually was played by James Caan, and a lot of the things that were softened or changed from the book to the movie basically all came down to all of these macho actors not willing to portray a character that gets humiliated and embarrassed and put in such a powerless situation. And it's just one of those things where, like, thank goodness that I think for the most part, some of that has moved past. You know, a lot of society has moved past that idea, and yet we also still have all of these stories about the Fast and Furious movies about how both The Rock and Vin Diesel have in their contract that they're not allowed to lose a fight and stuff like that. so it just so it's just a little bit of a tangent, because but to bring it back to Tom Cruise, in Mission Impossible, he is playing a take a flawed take on Ethan Hunt, essentially, right?
Yep.
Like, he's a cop who's doing like the right thing, and he has the tragic backstory, except what does that do? It makes him a drug addict, right? And he is also a drug addict, and the movie is not afraid to have him look silly, to have him make mistakes that are costly, to be frequently bested in many circumstances, and like slapstick. You know, the movie has him like taking a bite full of a rotten sandwich or chasing rolling eyeballs down a ramp, right? Like these are things that it's kind of like the opposite of what I was just saying, is that in his portrayal of this character in Minority Report, he's not only being cool action star, but he's also willing to have his version of the cool action star have real flaws and not always have things under control. And
Right.
yeah, and so we'll get to the other Mission Impossible movies, but I in rewatching it, I'm glad we're kind of on the same page there, just because it really feels almost like, you know, we talked about the change in Ethan Hunt from 1 and 2 to 3, but now rewatching Minority Report, which came in between, it just feels obvious.
Yes.
So, do you want to talk a little bit, like maybe do plot summary for Minority Report for anyone who either hasn't seen it or it's been a while?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, obviously, we are going to do spoilers,
Yeah,
but I'm going to give the very overall, because I think we're going to get into the any details of the
yeah.
plot are either unnecessary or we'll get into
Mm-hmm.
the.
Could
So
start with the three to four sentence
right,
version.
exactly. So the government has a new program called pre-crime, because they have three clairvoyant humans who can visualize impending homicides, and then the officers like examine the data to determine the crime's location and apprehend the perpetrators before the crime occurs. There's like a piece to it though, because they don't always agree. So that's a so there's like a statistical thing, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
why there's an investigation that comes with it. But then what ends up happening is there ends up being a crime that occurs that they weren't able to see, at least at the beginning. We are it doesn't work the way that all the other crimes have. And so that becomes kind of the mystery noir point, is how did this crime exist when these precogs have been so good at preventing crime? And that's what we're navigating as we're realizing, obviously, it
Are
becomes
you
somebody
still
who,
trying to avoid spoilers?
no, I
Okay.
wasn't trying to
I no,
avoid spoilers. Yeah.
I'm just interested because the way you chose to describe the plot is just very different than what I would have, which is not a problem. I'm just interested in the differences, because where I would have gone is uh, the government has this pre-crime division that can see homicides, and so they've eliminated murder because they stop murders before they happen. But then all of a sudden the psychics say that our hero, Tom Cruise's character, is going to commit a murder. And he
Oh
thinks
yeah,
that
yeah.
can't possibly be true. And so he decides to try to find out what's really happening, only to discover that there is a much more sinister, larger plot than he could have possibly imagined. So
Yeah,
that was the part you kind of skipped, which felt
yeah,
pretty
that's
central
what
to
I
me.
get for reading off my notes, because I what I've started doing is taking like, shorthand notes of the plot to, like, for
Mhm.
when we do this, and that's my own. I was like, what did I miss? Oh, yeah, that's a pretty big part.
Yeah.
Um, so so yes, that inject that back into my
Yeah.
description. Yes,
Oh
and
no, I
that is
left
what
out the
is
inciting
happening.
incident.
Yeah. So that's the plot. Is yes,
Hmm.
he's trying to the guy who is charged with solving crimes that the precogs are finding now has to figure out why the precogs are wrong, and that's where the whole point about, like, how that's what the minority report
Right.
is that they don't always agree, so there's a statistical minority report that just gets put aside once the investigation is completed, and now that becomes the focus of, like, how do I figure out from the minority report how I am not actually going to commit this crime, that this is
Right.
not correct. And that's how everything kind of
Right.
unravels.
I mean,
Right.
because he's extra perplexed for so many reasons, right? One is he knows better than anybody that people don't get away with murders anymore, right? So he's thinking, how would I ever, I would never plan a murder because I would know that it wouldn't work. Also, this crime that's being predicted here is like, I don't even know who that is, right? Like, how could I, like, they say that I'm going to murder this guy from 4 days from now, but I don't even know who it is. But it's also playing with the classic tropes of prophecy, right? Of, like the whole Oedipus thing of, like, in your attempt to prevent the prophecy from coming true, you end up making it come true. And that whole thing, which is a lot of fun. But there's just so much clever
Well, yeah, because
intricacies in how all this
there's the
works.
other little friction in there of that he's like thinking, well, the only way I could do this is if it was like a crime of passion.
Mm-hmm.
Those the precogs can still figure out. They're quicker. They're like less than an hour,
Right.
right? But those are the only ones that cause them trouble because they're not premeditated. But a
Mm-hmm.
fort, but he's like, but that's where the rub is that, well, how could this be a crime of passion that they know I'm going to commit 4 days from now, when crimes of passion have short timelines? And
Mm-hmm.
that's established very early on in one of the murders, is that, or one of the
Right. Well,
solved murders, is
yeah.
that it's going to be a crime of passion. So the guy, they get there and the guy doesn't even believe that be he's going to kill his wife or whatever. I think it was what it was, right? But the
Right.
but the guy
Yeah.
they apprehend didn't even know he was going to do it, and so Tom Cruise is like, well, that would be the only way that I could be this, but this is too long of a forecast, you know. And so
Right.
there's that little interesting, like, nuance to it that I thought was interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and further, he has additional reason to be suspicious because this pre-crime operation is presently relatively local, but there's discussion of widening it, although it's not clear how that would actually work when they still only have the three precogs. But the movie doesn't really ever get into that. But
Yeah.
but in any case, Colin Farrell has been sent from the larger government to kind of check out how it all works. And so we have Tom Cruise and his mentor who runs the whole operation, played by Max von Sydow. I keep calling. Let's see. I'm trying to remember. John Anderton is Tom Cruise's character's name. Um,
Yes.
so the two of them are worried that what Colin Farrell is planning to do is to come in and figure out how they do it so that he can take it away from them and he will run it instead of them when it goes bigger, right? Like that's what they're worried about. So when all of a sudden they've predicted a crime that he's going to commit, is like he's thinking, wait, this doesn't make sense. And there's someone who has recently showed up who I believe to have ulterior motives. So maybe somehow he's doing it. Like he's framing me somehow. And I've got
Right.
to figure out how. But the problem is, of course, that they have a pretty slick operation set up, and now he finds himself having to outwit his own his own coworkers and his own systems.
Yes.
Um, and we also had established briefly in the background that he has the tragic backstory where his son disappeared one day in a real horror story of a little vignette when we just see the it's the classic, you're at a crowded pool and all of a sudden he's just not where he was a second ago and you never see him again. And it's like that's like it's terrifying and they just never found him, and so that's what ends up breaking up his marriage, and it's why he's on drugs now. And he's kind of obsessed with this, and then of course as he continues to explore all of this, part of what he eventually finds out, well, I guess that's maybe getting ahead of it. I don't know if we're going beat by beat or not, but so he's got all of that established, but he's trying to figure it out. And so this movie is actually, I guess it's, I was going to say episodic, but I guess it's really just more procedural because it's just following him through all the little beats of him trying to figure out what's going on, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's super film noir structure
yeah, yeah.
with a sci-fi. That's what part of what makes it so cool is that it has the procedural of a film noir, though not like a crime investigation. Like you could totally see this as a Bogart, you know, like
Hmm.
being framed. The guy the cop who gets framed. Like it's
Or,
very much
double
that.
indemnity or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but in 2050 or whatever the movie takes place, right?
yeah.
So it's yeah.
So let's see, like the major beats, right? We have our opening where we watch them carry out one of their pre-crime operations where they stop a guy from killing his wife. Then we learn a little bit about what Colin Farrell is here to do, but then we get, in the process of Tom Cruise trying to not disobey his orders by showing to show this guy around, but also trying to figure out how to brush him off. All of a sudden, a new murder prediction is for him. He has to run. He tries to get away in his car, but it's an auto drive computer controlled car. So as soon as the APB is out for him, he loses control of the car and has to try to jump out of it. But then his first stop is to try to say someone is faking the pre-crime vision, right? And so how could that be? And so he goes to try to find the woman who invented it, right? Who like invented the whole system. And so he finds her, and she's the one that tells him about the idea of a minority report, right?
Right.
Um, and tells him the only way to see the minority report is to get it from the precog who had the vision, which is complicated because it means he has to go right back into the headquarters of the whole operation.
Right.
Also, just as is typical for this movie, every little NPC that had, every NPC featured character for each of these little vignettes has just a ton of business to go on. Like, so this is the old woman who invented the systems, but also hates it now because basically she sees it as kind of a fundamentally immoral system, and yet it's been taken out of her hands. Um, and so she is pretty unsympathetic to his plight. It's a little bit more of like, well, what did I tell you? That sort of thing. But then she's also got like all of these weird like plants, like that are poisonous or have like little tendrils that like wrap around and have spines on them and everything. And she basically tells him like her own version of predicting the future, which is to say, you're going to do whatever you can because you have to survive. And that's what everybody does. So, and it's kind of like the whole exchange that they happen later of everybody runs. Right. Uh,
Yep.
but in any case, so he has to go back. He has to kidnap one of the precogs. And so there's all of the business about how, in order to do that, he has to get his eyes changed because all the security systems are based on retinal scans. There's a lot of business there. But ultimately, after all of the business of him actually managing to kidnap her, and get her to a place where they can sort of search her memories, it doesn't look any different. It looks the same. He doesn't have a minority report, which is just, he can't believe it, because it's like that suggests he is actually still about to do it. I feel like we're just describing it beat by beat, but we're almost there anyway, so might as well just finish it out.
Fire through.
Yeah, so there is no minority report. All the while he's getting chased by Colin Farrell. And then eventually he ends up on a lead of, this is where it's supposed to happen. And now we're into the really heavy prophecy tropey sort of thing, where he knows that the surest way to not reenact that prophecy vision is to not go to the place that it shows him doing it. And yet he has to know, right? He can't allow himself to just not know. And so he's following up on it, even though it means he's going to the place at that time. And it turns out this guy, at least initially, it seems that he is the guy who kidnapped and killed his son. Except he hesitates just enough for the guy to reveal he didn't actually do it. He was paid by someone to say he did and get killed. So it wasn't so much that someone was framing him for a murder as much as they were setting him up to commit one.
Right.
And the key point there that gets made, that really just is like the pivot point for everything, is him realizing the whole idea of pre-crime is based on the idea that if they see this murder vision, then it's definitely going to happen. And if you don't stop it, then it will happen. And so you are ethically able to imprison these people, even though they technically haven't done anything yet, because it's so certain that they would have. But then he realizes
that he doesn't.
When he knows that that's what's going to happen, it gives a chance to change it. And that just really upends the whole ethical question of it. Even though in kind of a weird storytelling beat, he still kind of does it anyway, but almost like sort of by accident. That's actually one scene that I don't feel like works super well.
Right.
I don't like, the blocking of it just feels weird. Like,
we'll finish out the plot and then we can come back to tackle these.
So yeah, there's lots of little nuance there. But in any case, he ends up doing it, but now he knows that there's a conspiracy. And we discover at about this time, I think, in the movie, now, I think after that is when he goes to where his wife is living out in the country, and he's brought the precog with her, and we learn a little bit more about like what had happened with their son, and why they split up, and just all of that sort of thing together. And it's the first time that our precog character, played by Samantha Morton, is getting the opportunity to like see a little bit what like a different kind of life might look like. But there is actually also the conspiracy is from Max von Sydow's character, not Colin Farrell. And there's a great moment where, very reminiscent of LA Confidential, actually, where the guy we're thinking he's the shady one actually figures out the conspiracy, but confronts the wrong guy with it and gets shot in the stomach for his trouble. But that's a great scene. But in any case, ultimately, Tom Cruise's character, is caught because there's just too much odds against him in this. But he had told his wife enough about what was going on for her to continue following up on this conspiracy, to the point where she ends up breaking him out of this weird imprisonment that they've got, and the two of them together manage to reveal the conspiracy, which was all on the basis of it was kind of a combination of factors, because ultimately what is revealed is that the precog's mother had wanted her daughter back, and Max von Sydow's character killed her to stop it, doing a very clever get around for the whole pre-crime thing by paying someone to kill her. And then when that guy gets caught by pre-crime, he essentially reenacts that vision so that it looks like it's just the same vision coming through a second time. So that's all revealed. He did that because he believed in pre-crime so much that he couldn't allow this woman to mess it all up by reminding people of the fundamental humanity of these precogs that are being used for government machinery.
Right.
But it is a whole. There's the whole question that's interrogated there in the climax is this idea that pre-crime, for all of these other problems that we're talking about, is nonetheless stopping a lot of murders. And that's a good thing. And so Max von Sydow is essentially trying, and the ends justify the means sort of argument. But ultimately, they decide, Tom Cruise decides, no, that's that I don't believe in that. It better for the whole system to be torn down than to let it continue under these circumstances. And so we end up with kind of a understated, bleak, ambiguous ending that's happy in some respects, and yet like we get the happy, it feels like a happy ending that the system is shut down. We don't have any more of these ethical concerns. The precogs get to live a happy life out in the country. And then the final image is the title card of saying how many murders there were the very next year after this got shut down. And so it's just one of those things where, but I think it's great sci-fi. And it's great action. I think this movie is it's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun, and also like challenges you with some of these moral and ethical things. I think that is an underrated part of this movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, so. I mean, it is based loosely, kind of like other adaptations have been, on a story by Philip K. Dick, who I think there are an awful lot of his work that doesn't necessarily translate directly to screen very well, but does lay the foundation for good stories to be made. Although I guess it's an imperfect track record. Like some of them are pretty good, like this one and Blade Runner and Scanner Darkly, I think is pretty good, although that one doesn't get talked about very much. But then there's a handful of others that are not as good. But yeah, there's a lot of really interesting, chewy sci-fi there, right? Of just the implications of this sort of idea of like, what could it mean if you could do this, and how would you implement it, and what would that mean, and what costs might you be willing to pay for the perceived benefit. All of that stuff I think is really pretty interesting. And then it's all filled out with lots of just little lived in world building detail that makes a lot of interesting things. Although some of it I think ages better than others. And this is kind of part of what I was getting into earlier, which was just like, for how interesting visually it is, the interface that Tom Cruise is using to sort through the visions, he has these fancy gloves and he's standing before this great big curved board and he's doing all these fancy gestures to zip them along and everything like that. And it all looked very cool, and it still looks cool, but at the same time, there's an element where I watch those scenes today and I say, You know what other tools are really good for doing that exact same kind of thing is a mouse and keyboard. It's not actually obvious that this elaborate display he's doing is actually any more effective than that, but it sure does make him need to wave his arms around a lot more.
Yes.
So it's cool looking, so it's very effective cinematically, but it's also dubious that it's actually would be a useful technology.
Yeah, I see it more of like a giant touch screen,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like a big giant iPad,
yeah,
you know. And so yeah, again, it doesn't exactly like that, but I also can see how utilizing hands as opposed to the full mouse and keyboard is something on certain things that does make sense,
yeah.
you know.
Well, and to be sure, there have been a whole lot of movies that have followed this movie's lead in terms of how to try to depict things. Like it's extremely common in the MCU, for example, but also a lot of other sci-fi that has come since then. This of having like some sort of a holographic display where it's like you're manipulating these things in real 3D space, even though it's all just like hologram or something like that. I mean, that's like common now, but and I don't know even that this was really the first, but it was certainly a very notable,
Right.
interesting depiction of that. But then we've got all of the fancy cars. We've got all of the retinal scan stuff doing where we get a lot of um, so low key dystopian surveillance state sort of stuff that is played pretty subtly, right? Like they don't necessarily like the movie doesn't make a big deal about it, but there's also, hey, in the future, you might just have to accept that in your little low rent apartment, you might sometimes have to let the police robot spiders crawl under your door and scan your face. You might just have to be okay with that because it's gonna happen. Better not resist it or else they'll electrocute you.
I mean, done it.
Well, for those only listening in audio, Mike has just held up his iPhone. Um, yeah, and so, but it's just one of those things too where there's a lot of pieces of that, and for that matter, the what is happening every time they're arresting someone for these pre-murders is they get put in like suspended animation, like this weird, like where their body looks like it's in a coma or something, but we're told supposedly that they're like aware and like watching TV or something in there.
Yeah, it's sort of matrixy, like kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, but not.
Because yeah, we got Tim Blake Nelson camping it up in as the guy who sort of oversees all of these people imprisoned in this way, and the way he puts it is they look like they're asleep, don't they? But inside, busy, busy, busy is the way he says it. So, but we don't really know exactly what they're doing. But it's also unclear, like, is that for some period of time? Is it indefinite? What? How long are they in there? There's no trial as that we can tell because the whole thing is predicated on the idea of they were for sure going to do it. So there's no legal. It seems like there's no actual court case or anything like that. There's not a specific sentence that we hear, and it's all pretty, like it's a little alarming in some
Yeah.
respects.
Well, that's why I think you hit it dead on when you said it's sort of like subtly dystopian. Like
Mm-hmm.
it is dystopian. It doesn't hit us over the head with it. It just it shows us. It doesn't tell us,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It shows us why this. Well, the end of the movie, right? It shows us why this is a good idea and a bad idea all at the same time.
Right.
And
Well,
it shows us that the entire movie, which is it's very true to that dynamic, which is you know an adaptation like the screenplay adaptation is phenomenal.
mm-hmm.
Because that those threads are just present everywhere.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and we see how uneven the distribution of wealth and technology is in this society because we have some places where people are living in, you might look at just those locations and say, oh, well, it's the future, it's utopia, except that there are also slums where people don't have all of that stuff and they're living in filth. And it's like, well, that's pretty classic, sci-fi stuff, meaning like it's not the first movie to do that, but it
No,
shows that, it shows us that, right?
I honestly think that I think it's Mission Impossible 3 too, where they go to Singapore, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, because there's a very much that's a part of that movie. Like they go from these glamorous skyscrapers to like slums and huts, like that are literally like in the neighborhood behind it, like,
Hmm.
and that's our current reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just as we talk about like this film having a lot of impact on that, like that
Well,
is
right. It's we're showing a future where there's all of this new fancy technology that we don't have, but then it's also making it very clear not everybody has equal access to all those new fancy toys.
Mhm.
And so dealing with all of that is pretty interesting. But then we also have other wrinkles like the fact that these police use apparently completely non-lethal weaponry. No guns. Like the only traditional gun we see in this is the one that Max von Sydow uses.
Yep.
Everyone else has these weird like little like sonic shockwave guns, or they have what they call sick sticks that like are like cattle prods that they jab you with it and they makes you throw up. And then they have these little halos that it's like if they put it over your head, and I guess it like makes you unconscious or catatonic or something. But at the same time, even though it's non-lethal, it's certainly not portrayed as like humane. Like every
Right.
time we see them whip out what they call the halo, everybody's terrified of it. It's like, oh God, don't put that thing on me. Like it's not portrayed as like, oh well, isn't it nice and normal? Isn't it nice and good that they don't use guns? Not that I'm saying guns are great, but I'm just saying the point is that these, it's kind of like today when we talk about so-called less lethal um, ammunition and that sort of thing, because it's still not great. But in any case, there's a lot of really interesting, crunchy world building detail in there.
Yes.
The only other one that I was going to kind of call out as feeling weird, I think I felt the same about it then, is when Tom Cruise's character is obsessing over the old memories of his kid. He has these old like family videos that he's playing on, like, it seems clear what's happening is that he has a 2D video that he is using a computer to convert into a pseudo 3D hologram,
Right.
but it looks terrible. Like, I feel like, okay, maybe the implication is the original video was before you were taking it in 3D, and so that's why it's 2D, but it would look better if he just left it in 2D. And so the 3D element of it, like, this is not even really a criticism of the movie per se. It's more just kind of like when I watch those scenes, it makes me like grit my teeth because I'm like, why why are you doing that? Why are you doing it like that? It looks so bad.
Yeah, that one is true.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to some extent, I feel like we could almost do that better today than it looks in this movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but in
Um,
any case,
and you already kind of touched on the one part that doesn't feel as genuine is when the guy basically commits suicide, but it's still his
yeah,
murder, and it kind of like, so it came true, but really it didn't, and but it's kind of like it's still that it's the blocking of that, but it's also sort of the, I don't know, it, I get what they're trying to do in that show that like you can have a, there is a decision point that maybe
mm-hmm.
the precogs aren't
I
aware of. if
I
all right, so if all the things come together correctly, but like it's weird that like he still has to die. I don't know.
it
It's you.
it feels like a really clunky trying to solve a script problem, because let's play this out for a moment and say Tom Cruise has realized what's going on. He understands this guy's being framed. He understands that he does have a choice by virtue of having been told his future, which allows him to hesitate enough that he doesn't do it right away. He learns more information. Then what do you do with that guy, right? I can see them writing the script and saying, what do we do with that guy? Are we going to have John Anderton just leave him in the room there? We're going to have him. We've shown no other police systems in place that would allow us to have him take the guy in handcuffs or something. Like, I can understand them saying we need to just eliminate. So it's a little bit like when we watched Lethal Weapon, and there's the whole sequence where he finally learns the truth about what's going on from the one guy, but then the guy gets shot by a sniper rifle from a helicopter through the window, right? You've got
Right.
it. It's the noir thing of, now that we have learned this guy's plot coupon, you have to get rid of him,
Right.
right? And so it feels like that's the problem they're trying to solve here, because the idea that Tom Cruise then kills him anyway, that doesn't feel right. To just do it, because why would he? Because that would feel more monstrous than anything, right? Because it's one thing to kill him in passion when you think this is the guy who killed your son among many others. It's another thing to just discover, oh wait, no, this guy is a patsy in a conspiracy designed to frame me. Let's kill him anyway, right? That wouldn't make any sense. So they have to contrive somehow, and it feels like what should happen is that someone else should kill that guy. But then who would that be and how? And that seems overcomplicated. But at the same time, it just their solution that it's effectively this guy trying to kill himself so that his family will still get the money in accordance with this whole conspiracy. But just again, like you said, it's the blocking of how that moment actually plays out just doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel authentic. It feels really awkward.
Right.
Also, I will say, even upon just the second viewing, I think the whole gag with the guy with the sunglasses out the window, it just feels so obvious. Like, I don't know that I did figure it out in advance, like the first time, but it's just one of those things where as soon as you see it in the movie, when you're watching for the second time, you're like, wait, no, how are they thinking that's actually a real guy there in the room, just outside the window somehow on this high up floor?
Right.
Like it doesn't make any sense why that they would think that that's another guy, and not them saying. See, what I would have think maybe might have worked better is if they had immediately said that's a billboard, but it's not a billboard that's up yet, so they can't track the place by it because it's not up yet, because they're raising it into place as the whole thing is coming down, right? So, but in any case, that's yeah. So
Yeah. It just tries to get a little more clever than it needed to at that point.
yeah,
And but to your point, they had to manufacture something
mm-hmm,
to move from that point of the plot on.
yeah,
So I think we've covered it, but yeah,
mm-hmm,
it's
yeah. So I,
detrimental to the
it's
film.
it's a minor nitpick in a movie that I think is absolutely full of just really fantastic, you know, sequences. I remember one of the things that I think that you and I actually might have discussed about this movie back around the time that it came out. One of the things that's fascinating is you could almost imagine another version of this story where the Colin Farrell character is the hero, investigating who he thinks is a dirty cop,
Yeah.
right? And I think that that could be another interesting way to play it. I think Colin Farrell, for a relatively underwritten role, has some great moments in this. Like the scene where uh, Tom Cruise has just discovered this murder vision about him, and he thinks Colin Farrell's doing it, and so he's trying to get out of the building, but he ends up sharing an elevator with Colin Farrell by coincidence and starts threatening him, and uh, and so Colin Farrell is immediately saying, "Oh, come on, I know you're not going to kill me because if you did, there would be alarms, right?" And that's right when the alarms go off, and there's just this moment of him just going kind of pale and eyes widening, and it's a great reaction shot. That's some
Yes.
good stuff right there. Um,
Yes.
yeah. And then I mentioned it earlier, but the scene where he kind of figures out at least some of the pieces of what Max von Sydow's up to, and I don't. He didn't have it all put together because if he did, he probably wouldn't be bringing it to the guy who's responsible. But once again, the very moment there of just Max von Sydow, who's obviously he's great too, doing this moment of, do you know why there's no police breaking in my windows right now? It's because one of the precogs is missing. And they're just like, oh wait, no, he knows that he can do it now because what they and then of course we also have the whole sequence where Samantha Morton as the precog has started to become a little bit more conscious and aware, and she
Once they figure out of
starts.
the pool. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and well, but also the bit where he's taken her to the mall to try to get some clothes for her, and they're having to escape because the cops are coming. But then she starts saying, doing things just like grab the umbrella. No, wait, stop here. Hold, hold, and he's like, what? And all of a sudden, it turns out that by standing in that one spot at exactly that moment, there's a bunch of balloons that block the view for right where they are from where the cops are. And then later, they're escaping out of corridor, and it's it's another one of these sort of weirdly ambiguous moments where she says, "Throw some money," and the reason is because he throws some money on the ground by a homeless guy, which makes him, first of all, like it's kind of a mean thing to do, right? Like it's like you're going to give some change to a homeless guy, except you're spilling it all over the ground and making him pick it up. But also, the reason that to do that is so that he's in the way and the cops trip over him when they try to chase after him. So that's just another like
Yeah.
complicated
And that,
feelings there.
well, and it's also that whole part is leads into that whole dichotomy that the whole movie is putting in there, and that once you start to see her as a sentient person, like you recognize that like she's obviously awkward in the world,
Mm-hmm.
but is leaving him in a pool, like, is that
Well,
what's right for these guys? Which then
yeah,
when you find out that the whole point that Max von Sydow killed their mother for wanting, or one of the mother for wanting to bring him out,
mm-hmm.
it makes that even more like, well,
well,
she had a right to bring them out. Like they're sentient, like they're weird,
mm-hmm.
but they're not like incapable of functioning.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, like once she is allowed to let all the drugs they give her wear off and she is able to speak, she makes it very clear that she does not want to go back. She doesn't want to keep doing that. And
Right.
I mean, if
Which
you imagine, it's like, here, let's keep you in a dreamlike stupor for your entire life and make you see nothing but visions of murders 24/7.
yeah, that would suck.
Yeah, that sounds awful.
Yeah,
Um,
because it doesn't state this at the beginning of the movie, but it sort of implies that they don't function outside of this. Like, so this is just like where they need to be.
yeah, like
It's until she gets removed that they recognize, oh, well, actually, we're doing this to
yeah,
them.
the propaganda is that it's like that they are essentially brain dead otherwise anyway, and what a miracle it is that we can take that tragedy and reap this benefit from it
Right.
when it becomes clear that no, it is very much an imposed tragedy, and further that the Well, actually, I think they do establish that it wasn't like government experiments that caused it in the first place. It was a new drug on the market that caused strange reactions with some people.
Yeah.
But they did try to replicate it.
Yes, but that's sort of how he excuses away the mother is because she
Yeah,
was a drug addict, and
exactly. Right. Yeah.
how it. Yeah, so
So
that's actually pretty slick, like how that
yeah.
whole thing is done.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, like so I think, again with the minor, quirk that we talked about, that one particular scene not necessarily working as well as it might have. On the whole, I think it's great sci-fi. It's telling an interesting story. It's got a lot of cool action, cool world building, and to just bring it all the way back around to Tom Cruise, it's him really engaging a gear that we hadn't really entirely seen him do before, that is going to become like his one of his primary MOs moving forward, which is to say, like one of the things that we talked about when we talked about Mission Impossible versus James Bond is, without saying that one version is better than another, there's kind of two flavors of action heroes. There's the action heroes that make everything look easy, like James Bond does, and the action heroes that make everything look hard, like, say, Indiana Jones does, or Ethan Hunt as the Mission Impossible movies continue. But it is three that really kind of starts that. And as we established, John Anderton in Minority Report is having a rough go of it. He's not having a good time doing all of these adventures. Things are not working out very well for him. He barely scrapes by, and he's having not very much fun in the process. Um, Things are, he's smart and resourceful, but he is, making it by the skin of his teeth constantly.
yep,
Yeah. So, in any case, you think we're ready to move on?
we are. I need to grab some water. Just
Okay.
it's
Sure, sure.
a storm and power outage and all that. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I mean, it's
sure.
I'll just get it in the other room. It's not
Yeah,
gonna be too. Yeah.
that's fine. I'll touch on some of the other movies in between, which is there's actually only two that were in between before we get to our next feature here. But we have a cameo, is his next movie here, and also in 2002, is that in the third Austin Powers movie, that movie opens with Austin Powers going to see a movie made of his own adventures in which Tom Cruise plays Austin Powers. And it's actually a really great cameo that is very much playing up his relatively new action hero kind of persona, right? Because I think it's, the Tom Cruise we see cameoing in Austin Powers in Goldmember is very much Mission Impossible 2 style action hero Tom Cruise, right? He's he's got the big smile, he's got the cool attitude. I think he's even got the slightly longer hair because it's kind of it's like a cooler take on the Austin Powers haircut.
Yes.
Yeah. But so, and then of course, the only other movie that we have in between that and our next one is The Last Samurai, which I think, I don't know, it's been a long time since I watched it, but I kind of think back on it as kind of ill advised and not great. I don't know. What do you think?
I it's complicated because while I see that point of view and I don't would never argue against it, I sort of enjoy it.
I mean, I think it's not an incompetently made movie. I think it's got some good stuff in it for sure. It is, I think, though, like when we talk today, I think the terminology was maybe a little bit less mainstream at the time. But when we talk about like white savior movies, where you have
Yeah.
the
Well, I
white character go to another culture and become better than they are at their own thing and help them from his own people, like that's exactly what that movie is.
100%. That's why I would never like argue that like it
Mm-hmm.
has some sort of place in anything. It's just
Yeah.
I I don't mind watching it. I think there are some interesting things that it
Mm-hmm.
highlights about. I do think while it is that white savior culture, I feel like it does. actually highlight some interesting parts of the samurai culture
Hmm.
that at least I'm trusting that the movie is getting mostly accurate. I mean, I'm not saying this
Uh,
100%. I think just to sort of conceptually, like the feeling of like what that was supposed to feel like. I don't know.
yeah, I am certainly no expert on samurai or anything like that, so I don't want to make any kind of claim to that effect. But my impression has been that the samurai, kind of as depicted in that movie, is very much sort of the like the romantic cinematic version of what samurai are and were, as opposed to like authentic history. But nonetheless, there are certainly lots of stories that depict them in that way, and it's not like it's an exception in
Yeah, and
that
there's
regard. It's just
plenty of westerns that do the
yeah.
same
Oh,
thing.
for
Like,
sure. Yeah. So I'm not really even criticizing that so much as just saying it's not really. It's going for um, evoking certain depictions of the samurai in popular
then
culture, as opposed to like being authentic about the real history. Is all.
yeah, and that's probably a better way to put it. That's what I enjoy. Like
Mm-hmm.
just I enjoy what it evokes, whether or not it's historically accurate. Like I'm not when I watch that movie, I'm not trying to police like whether it's
Yeah.
culturally appropriate or it's historically accurate. It's like okay, like this is entertaining to me, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm just can put it there and just sort of lives in that place.
Mm-hmm.
But I
I
don't
mean,
ever say like you should watch this movie. I don't ever say this is the
well,
best movie.
and
I
I'll
never
I'll
say this.
confess, it's been a long time since I saw it, and mostly what I remember is that like it's functional as a movie. It's got some good stuff in it for sure. Um, I remember liking it mostly okay, but it's also just kind of it has almost become like one of the standard bearers for what we mean when we talk about those types of plot lines. It's like one of the key examples you can point to of doing exactly that whole thing, which again does not make it inherently a bad movie. The problem is not that that is automatically a bad story so much as there are so many of them. And it just became kind of one of the archetypal versions of that.
Yep, fair enough. But
Yeah. Um, but in any case, from there we get to 2004, where we're going to talk about our next sort of feature movie here, which is Collateral, the Michael Mann directed uh, two-hander with Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx, um, where Jamie Foxx is a cab driver who is hired by Tom Cruise, who's playing a hitman, to drive him all over Los Angeles to commit various assassinations, and it becomes kind of a cat and mouse between them, um, and it's pretty good.
it is. I mean, this movie works. I mean, it's fun to see Tom Cruise play against type,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it works in this movie because like we've talked about in some of the earlier. While it's more nuanced, like
Mm-hmm.
he uses the fact that he is charming to make it hard for us to like 100% just be like that's the bad guy,
Well,
right?
yeah, I want to talk about that, but I go ahead and finish your point there.
Well, so that I mean that's it. It's like I said, it's the nuanced version of that. So he works, and then Jamie Foxx plays off of him very well,
Mm-hmm.
and then the whole thing wrapped up in what is just an absolute like Michael Mann fest of love letter to a nighttime LA. Like he Michael Mann showcases cityscapes like no other director, right? Like it's
Well,
just like a thing.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm not enough of an expert on like cameras and digital technology and all of that to really speak authoritatively on the subject, but I vaguely recall when this movie came out that it was one of the first movies being shot on the new generation of digital cameras. And that allowed them to have a higher dynamic range than most celluloid film would do, which led to the cityscape stuff that you were just mentioning looking like no other movie had really looked before,
Yeah.
because celluloid film can't really do that.
I don't know that, but it would 100% make sense. you know.
Um, yeah, I'm trying to. Let's see. Let's see. I'm looking at the IMDb trivia, trying to like back up this memory of mine. So, in an interview with American cinematographer Michael Mann said that, as far as he was aware, this was one of the first movies to attempt to make a look out of digital video rather than trying to make digital video look like film. This approach meant the movie could be shot in the low light scenes of urban desolation Mann wanted because digital reacts much better to low light than film. The approximately 20% of the picture that was shot on film was mostly, according to Mann, the portion set in the Fever nightclub, because this is the scene with the brightest lighting in which digital video does not perform as well. But I just remember hearing some of that, and in particular, one of the things that's notable about that, I feel like my computer is I'm slowing me down a little bit here. Let me try to close some of these other things I'm not using. But the like, for example, one of the things that's different about the look of LA in this movie compared to a lot of the contemporaries of the time, just the fact that they don't wet down the streets, right? That's a Hollywood thing, is they make streets, they wet them all down before they film them because it looks more interesting in theory. And like I feel like one of the movies that we talked about during the AFI list, and I can't remember which one, it was actually a trivia bit where they talked about initially deciding to not do that to try to be more authentic looking, and then deciding to do it after all because it looked worse when they didn't do it. But certainly in this one, you have lots of these nighttime street shots, and the streets are dry because they would be unless it's actively raining. But yeah, it's a very cool look. So I didn't mean to totally hijack that, but it was all on the basis of what you were saying. Michael Mann knows how to shoot cities.
Yes. So that's what makes this movie good, though, is that the three of them just sort of weave this story together into this, like you said, a cat and mouse. But anyway, you were going to talk about, Tom Cruise as the villain, but not exactly the villain,
Mm-hmm.
and like how that's sort of like how it straddles that line.
Well, I wasn't actually even going to say that so much as I feel he's pretty overtly the villain.
Okay, that's
But where I think it's interesting is you mentioned, like, in the layers of his performance and the places where he uses Tom Cruise's charm. But I think what it all comes down to is the section later on where Jamie Foxx is finally feeling brave enough to kind of call Tom Cruise on some stuff, and he's basically just kind of pointing out that, like, you don't understand how people think and feel about things because you don't think and feel that way. And so there are times when you feel like you know what's going on and you speak with authority and you act like you know what you're talking about. But a lot of that feels a little bit like you're just trying to put out your own mindset into the rest of the world, and then you get confused when the rest of the world doesn't react like you expect them to. Because ultimately, I think the character Tom Cruise is playing in this, and I think he plays the character well, is someone who is ultimately pretty hollow inside, but covers it very well, but not perfectly.
yeah, that's a good read. Yeah.
And I thought so. I think that's very interesting, and so that's why I just kind of like perked up a little bit when you were describing him that way, because I think he's very much a villainous character. He is a hitman who kills people for money and has no remorse about that at all, and ultimately becomes a Terminator by the end of the movie. Which I don't.
Yeah.
I'm kind of joking, but I don't actually mean it derisively. I think those sequences are pretty effective, but it is pretty much what's happening.
Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at, is that like it's hard to pin him as the villain right at the beginning, right? Like,
Oh, sure, yeah. Before we know what's going on, yeah.
right, like he's the hitman, but could he be killing bad people?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so maybe he's doing good work, even though it's like maybe it's complicated because yeah,
Yeah.
and
Well,
then it sort of unravels. Yeah.
yeah. We get. I think there's a great turning point when they go to the jazz club, because from our perspective and Jamie Foxx's perspective, it's a little bit like we already have established this guy is dangerous. He's a criminal. He is extorting Jamie Foxx at gunpoint to help him go around killing people. This is terrifying. But also, he has just said, I've got some time before my next appointment. Let's go to a jazz club. Then he's talking about his love of jazz, which I think, we could go on a separate tangent about the idea, the pretentiousness of movie characters that like jazz, which isn't to be a knock on jazz per se, but anyway. But we have the whole bit where he's talking about his love of jazz, and then he's chatting with this one guy, and it seems like he's acting like a human being, and there's this interesting connection, and Jamie Foxx is having this moment of almost like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see another side to this guy. Not like I like him, but at least I'm seeing him as more than just the hitman that is holding me at gunpoint, right? And so, but then it's revealed, oh no, this guy that we've just been having this friendly conversation about jazz with
It's
is
my
the
next point.
guy, and he gives him a completely bullshit trivia contest, pretending that he's going to let him get away if he gets it right, and then it's like, as Jamie Foxx calls out, he knew the answer. He just didn't give the answer that you decided in your head that you wanted, and therefore you killed him and made it seem like that was his fault for getting the answer wrong. That's it's nonsense. But you're pretending. So, and it's just an example of Tom Cruise's character has these things that he does to kind of pretend like he is engaging with people in any kind of a realistic way, when in fact what he is the sort of person that can have a friendly art conversation about someone and then without blinking shoot them in the head. That's not a normal person. It's even a different thing than someone who says I kill people for money and I shoot them from across the street with a sniper rifle. It's a different thing entirely to say, no, I'm going to have a friendly chat over drinks with this guy about his passion and his life's work for several minutes before I then toy with him like a cat and then shoot him in the forehead. Like, that's messed up. That's not just even a bad guy. That's like a psychopath or sociopath. I mean, it's all a bit muddled, but you know what I mean. Like,
Yes.
there's something kind of fundamentally broken or missing in Tom Cruise's character there. But at the same time, he has the charm enough that he can cover that most of the time. He can play the jazz conversation, right? Like he can act like he's having a normal conversation, even though we know later what's really must have been going on in his head, right? Like, and I feel like that is the big kind of scene where we start to kind of understand what's going on with him a bit more. He is not just a badass anti-hero who's killing bad guys, maybe. He is actually like a sociopath who kills people because, like, is it just for money? He certainly seems to enjoy his work, or at the very least doesn't mind it.
Exactly. So,
But we let's talk a little bit about Jamie Foxx in this, because I think that like he had certainly been around before this movie, because hadn't he already done a Lee? Um,
he should have already have done.
like he
Uh,
had,
probably had already done.
yeah. I mean, he'd been certainly around. Let's see, he did a Lee in um, so Ray was later this year. So he had been in some stuff before this, but I feel like
Yeah.
this was his
Any
first
given
like
Sunday was probably the really one where he, like, you wouldn't have probably known him from that, but that
oh
was the one that kind of put him on the, like, made him into a
yeah.
star. Yeah.
Yeah. So like he had been in some stuff, but
And
I've
the
yeah, I feel like Collateral was the first one, like not that I didn't know who he was, but where I was just like, oh yeah, he is absolutely a a movie star. And of course, he had already been cast in the lead for Ray, at that point. Um, but yeah, so he's great, and we see him in this, and there's the whole bit. He has that great, charming scene with it's Jada Pinkett Smith, right? Um, who he picks up, and they have kind of this flirting conversation where like he basically says, I'll bet that I can give you a shorter ride, and if I'm right that my way is faster, I'll give you your ride for free.
Yep.
Like, I mean, that's a pretty good deal from her side, right?
Yep.
um, and so it's just a little charming thing, and then he talks about the idea, his, you need to have, go on vacation. And so I go on vacation 15 times a day, and he has this little picture of like like a tropical island that it's a little postcard that he has on his sun visor, and he looks at that to, and he talks about wanting to start this business, island limos and everything, and it's all very nice, but I think we do get a little bit of a sense of like seems a little bit more like a daydream fantasy than a real business plan. And then, of course, once he drops her off and picks up Tom Cruise, as soon as they're having this conversation, as soon as it comes up, Tom Cruise calls him on that immediately, and it becomes a running theme throughout of this idea of you say you've got these big plans, but you keep saying you're not doing it yet because everything has to be perfect. As he says like later on, is like all it would have taken was a down payment on a Lincoln Town Car, and you could be on your way. How much money do you think you have to save up? You have to make everything perfect to start with. That's not a real plan, right? And so to call him on that, I like this movie doesn't though try to do the thing where because Tom Cruise's character ultimately does kind of push Jamie Foxx out of that, the stagnation a little bit, that means somehow he was actually not that bad a guy or something, right? I'm glad the movie doesn't try to do that. Like in a way, I'm thankful for that guy. Like, no, it was awful. I'm gonna have PTSD associated with my business plan now. Because the guy who told me how I should actually do it also was a hitman who tried to kill me and the girl that I would like to date. Like, um, but I think though that Jamie Foxx does a great job in this role though, of being the guy who is kind of stuck a little bit, and you get to that point where his mom calls him, and Tom Cruise's character is like, "Oh, yeah, well, you have someone you care about in your life. Well, maybe I should go meet her, and then I'll have more leverage over you."
Yes.
And then they go, and it's revealed, oh no, he's been lying to his mom about where he is with his business. And Tom Cruise is right there hearing all of that. Now, question for you. What
Yes.
is your impression of how Jamie Foxx's mom felt about Tom Cruise in that scene?
I I don't remember that scene. Like, I don't think that deeply about that scene. So
Hmm.
what I remember about it is that like I feel like she almost like feels like we feel like about when we first meet him,
Hmm.
in that he's very charming, very smart, but like something's not right.
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
Hmm. Well, so that's interesting just because that aligns a bit more with so I think it was Roger Ebert's review that it was that it kind of because my impression of that scene had been when it's just him or just her and Jamie Foxx, she's proud of him but criticizing him in a very typical sort of mom way. But then when Tom Cruise comes in, she's very much like, oh, now there's company, now there's a guest, we're on our best behavior for him. I'm not going to pick on my son in front of company, that sort of thing. But that it was really just about her. Like, I didn't get the impression from her that she thought there was anything wrong. But I was reading a review of it, and I think it was Roger Ebert's, where he commented on her sensing something wrong and trying to keep from making a problem, sensing that maybe her son was in trouble and not knowing what to do. And then you kind of said that a little bit too, and I guess I just hadn't picked up on that, and I was just that's why I was just curious. I don't think it's a big deal. It's just I
Yeah.
hadn't picked up on that, so thought it was just interesting to ask. But in any case, though, it's I think an interesting detour. It's good script writing, I think, because on the one hand, we can understand, even though it initially feels a little weird, we can understand from Tom Cruise's character's perspective why he would do this. Is because it's like, there's time. I need you to continue doing this for me. And I'm getting the sense that you're starting to feel a little squirrely about the whole thing. And so maybe I can actually keep you further under my thumb this way. When in fact it actually ends up exactly backfiring, right? Because what happens is that while that conversation is happening, that's when Jamie Foxx finally grabs his briefcase and runs away with it. So, uh, and I think it's a reflection too of kind of the conversation they ultimately end up having, of like, you don't actually understand how people think and feel. The fact that you thought that was the way to control me, you were wrong, right? And so ultimately, though, like it's the back and forth, and then just when it seems like Jamie Foxx may have finally gotten away, um, by virtue of crashing his car right next to a police car, and thus forcing Tom Cruise to run away if he doesn't want to get questioned by the police. Um, he discovers, oh wait, no, it turns out Tom Cruise's last target is in fact Jada Pinkett Smith's attorney character. Um, and I think it's only just a flicker of a moment where I don't believe that Jamie Foxx would flip the cop over his head like that and try to get the gun and cuff the guy. Like, that feels wrong to me. I do like that he then, as soon as he's got the guy secured, he says, I'm only doing this to save someone's life who's in danger right now. It's at this address. Come and send more people after me.
Yep.
I like that because because he's right now he has just done something that would get him shot 9 times out of 10. You know what I mean? It's like it's one of those where I feel like that moment feels, it's almost a little bit like the moment from Minority Report we were talking about, where just the blocking of that one instant where he turns the tables on the cop feels a little bit like, I'm not sure I buy this character doing that in the moment.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be like he's just so passionate about wanting to go save
Right.
uh Annie.
Yeah. And we
You
and we can understand why it wouldn't work for him to try to explain to the cop in that moment, because the cop has just seen the dead body in his trunk left there by Tom Cruise previously. So,
know,
like, the guy has his, the police officer has his gun on him already, thinks he's a murder suspect, and isn't listening to a word he says. So we can understand why he feels like, I can't reason with him in time to solve this problem. I've got to do something else, but that something else doesn't feel completely right to me. And in a movie where that was really the only moment that felt like that to me. That's all I was saying. But I like, again, that it's immediately followed up by him saying, I'm so sorry about this. It's because someone's life is in danger right now. It's at this address. Come and help me. I like that. I like that. Um, it's and this thus begins like the Terminator section, though, of the movie, where he's trying to call and warn her, but the cell phone he has, the battery is dying. It's kind of interesting just watching the movie from this time period because it is, you know, post everybody has a cell phone, but pre everybody has smartphones, right? Everyone's got like the little flip phones in this movie, and so there's no like internet or navigation or emails or any of that, but they can call each other. And so he has the phone number. He's trying to warn her, and then a lot, mostly it's kind of just action at this point, right?
Yep.
It's pretty good action though. All of the tension of getting on or off the subway train or the subway car, that's pretty great, right? This moment where we've gotten onto the train, but oh no, he got on the train too, and he's coming through. We're coming up to a stop, but oh wait, can we get out? Wait, no, he's going to know we're going to try to get out, and they're in different cars, both trying to watch for whether the other person is getting off or not. Ends up at a stalemate. That's just such a great moment. Almost felt like the image that comes to mind is like a submarine movie.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I think that whole climactic scene in the metro and even sort of the weird kind of ending, which I think really hits on the point that you were saying about Vincent being like a hollow man.
Mm-hmm.
Like his ending is like the guy who died on the metro and
Yeah.
that nobody knew he was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's kind of what, even though he's bleeding, like, I mean, it's not
Right.
exactly
Well, it's
that, but
also
it's like,
like it's to some extent it doesn't entirely invalidate his point because it's a very different situation. The fact that they've just had a shootout on the train, there's broken windows and blood everywhere. Like I think they'll notice that.
wait, but I'm saying it
Right.
actually it hits on a lot of the points that you
Yeah.
proved, and
Mm-hmm.
that he is hollow and that he's sort of forgotten on, and that he's sort of like there's nobody's going to miss him, right?
Yeah.
And that's what his point is.
Mm-hmm.
But then he's also using this like, oh, it's like the same thing as having the conversation with the jazz club guy. Like
Yeah.
he's made himself very good at like knowing these anecdotes and stories
Mm-hmm.
that he even tells himself one as he's dying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it hits on all those. It like touches all those little cylinders that you
It's
were
almost
talking.
like he even beaten he has to still be right at the end. He still has to like get
Yep.
the last word,
Right.
even though
He still has to be clever
yeah.
and like yeah and
I think Tom Cruise actually plays the physicality of that whole little bit really well too. Actually, because like, uh, what leads up immediately to that is sort of a shootout where the two of them fire at each other through the closed train doors, right?
right.
And I think, I mean, there's nothing else to it other than just Jamie Foxx got really lucky, right? I don't think there's anything more to it than that.
No, and I don't think it's supposed to
Yeah.
be like it's
Well, no,
that.
I agree. I'm just trying to make sure I didn't like miss something that was supposed to explain why he succeeded in hitting Vincent and didn't get hit himself. Because he's fighting a Terminator and he outdraws a Terminator essentially. It's like that's what I'm getting at. But it's fine. It's like I don't mind that he got lucky. I'm just trying to make sure if there was some reason that I didn't miss it or gloss over it. But the point is, they've had the exchange of fire, and we don't know yet who's okay and who's not. And I like Tom Cruise doing just this moment of just kind of like subtle irritation and then going to reload his gun and then he just like can't help but drop it. And then as he's kind of looking down and a little bit perplexed, we see the blood blossoming under his jacket, and just this moment of like, just like he's irritated um, that this is happening. It's like, oh man, like this is going to really delay my schedule. That sort of attitude about it, even as he's losing his ability to hold things and stand up, right? So he kind of sags into the seat for that last dialogue exchange, and it's good stuff there, and but again, it's like I like at the end that we don't end with Jamie Foxx saying, "But I do have one thing to thank him for." Like I'm glad that we don't do that, right?
Yeah.
because that he shouldn't should not
Nope.
thank him for that. It's a little bit like the whole thing in Fight Club, where the sequence where they find that guy and it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna hold this guy at gunpoint and I'm gonna take his driver's license and I'm gonna tell him that if he hasn't pursued his dreams in 3 months, I'm gonna come back and shoot him or something like that, and then acting like you've actually done that guy a favor,
Right.
right? I'm glad we don't do that. Um, but it's actually, you know what it makes me think of again is like having just rewatched Misery. The Misery movie actually ends like that. It James Caan essentially says, you know, if the one thing I have to thank her for is that she got me writing again, and it's like, and I'm sitting there watching that like, what are you talking about? Anyway, but yeah, so I mean, I think I don't know that there's necessarily as much thematically to get into with this one as there was for Minority Report, but it's just a solid thriller, right? I
Yeah.
mean, um, it's great the exchange between these two guys. There's some good action. There's good cinematography. It's just a lot of fun to watch. And as you know, the Tom Cruise of it all, you know, for all the fuss that people made about how his hair is dyed gray in it, which is ultimately, I mean, it's not a big deal, but it is a different look than he's ever had on screen before, right? You know,
Yes.
but because it's not even to make him look older, right? It's not like old age gray. It's like steely silver, sort of.
Yeah, it's to make him look different. Like it's
Yeah.
meant to make him look different. Like he's
Hmm.
playing against type. Like they just kind of really leaned into it,
Hmm.
and yeah, I think it works. So
It just actually makes me just briefly wonder: has there been any other Tom Cruise movie where his hair has been dyed any other color? I can't think of one.
I don't think so.
Hmm. Not that he needs to or anything. I'm just, you know. But in any case, though, it's again, it's him very much in his action mode, but still being willing to have the characters that he's playing be um, more complex, right?
Yep.
He does not have to be uh, the handsome leading man, right? He can be something else. But so, should we go ahead and move on?
Yep.
All right. So, after Collateral was Steven Spielberg again in 2005 with War of the Worlds. And War of the Worlds, I think the first two-thirds are great, and it has some real story problems towards the end. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I can still remember the specific bits where I feel like even on first viewing, I said, "Hey, wait a minute." In any case, but some parts of it are just really fantastic. But it's also another transition, though, in Tom Cruise as a person, though, because it is during the press tour for War of the Worlds that he starts going off the rails a little bit in terms of his public persona. Like he had already been involved with Scientology and so on up to that point, but this is the whole bit where like he's with Katie Holmes and he loves her so much that he has to jump on Oprah's couch, which I
Yep.
think he hoped was going to be charming and endearing, and ended up feeling kind of manic and over the top. Um, and then the whole your glib Matt uh, interview about like being anti psychology and all of that sort of thing, and it really kind of people started thinking of Tom Cruise in a different sort of way after that. I think. Um, but he does certainly still keep making movies though, because we get Mission Impossible 3 in 2006.
Keep
Uh,
going up. I gotta check
yep,
on the dog real quick.
sure. Lions for Lambs in 2007, which I honestly don't think I ever saw. I don't know very much about that one. But then in 2008, he has a great bit part in Tropic Thunder, where he is borderline unrecognizable in a bald cap and weird, like, prosthetic forearms, um, and being this crazy movie producer who has kind of an incredible dance sequence, despite that being like you get a first impression of that character, the idea that he's going to have a memorable dance sequence seems unlikely, and yet there it is. Um, and I actually, just as another tangent, I heard just recently that there has been discussions of him doing a new project featuring the return of that character, which seems really bizarre, but at the same
What?
time,
I never heard that.
oh, it's just recently, like the last couple of days, I saw that. It's like in Variety or something. But in any case, after that, he does Valkyrie, which is the movie about the some of the German soldiers who tried to assassinate Hitler during World War II, which I think I don't know. I thought it was like okay, but it really felt just like a single rather than a whole home run. If you follow me, like it's not bad. It doesn't feel like it makes any like major serious missteps, but it also just kind of comes and goes without
Yeah,
a lot of attention.
I
Did you
remember
see?
enjoying it, but nothing more than that. Yeah,
Yeah. Did you see Lions for Lambs? I didn't ever see that one. I don't really know anything about it.
I didn't. No.
Okay. But then in 2010, there's Night and Day, where it's him and Cameron Diaz, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's another one that I didn't see. It because it seemed like it was sort of just
Bad.
well, I was going to say just light action comedy where he's kind of just doing another riff on Mission Impossible 2 era Ethan Hunt. But I that was just an impression from the trailer. I didn't actually see it. But the trailer didn't make it look good because I like Cameron Diaz and I like Tom Cruise. So for me to not feel like going to see a movie that stars the two of them,
Well, and Cameron Diaz was in Vanilla Sky with him, and it worked really well. So it wasn't
yeah,
like that. It was just a. It wasn't good. It was on my list when I was considering do we watch some good Tom Cruise and some
mm-hmm.
like missteps. This was one of the missteps. Like it's just not
Yeah.
a good movie. You know.
Mm-hmm.
It
It's what one of the things that I think is a little bit interesting about it is that it feels a little bit like he's because there's 2 years in between Valkyrie and Night and Day, um, and it feels almost a little bit like maybe he's trying to reset the clock a little bit and try to go back to being just charming leading man guy, and then it just does not work because people don't see him that way anymore.
yeah.
But then we get Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol in 2011, which is, that's, I think we established that's the first Macquarie Mission Impossible, right? Yeah. Yeah.
That's Brad Bird.
Oh, no,
I
you're
thought.
right. You're right. Yeah. Macquarie comes in with Rogue Nation. But yeah, that's the Brad Bird one. But that's the one with the Burj Khalifa, right? Am I wrong?
Yes.
Yes. No, that's definitely the one with the Burj Khalifa. Just,
Yes.
which still, I think, as someone who's still a fan of the whole franchise, I think that's still the standout set piece, right?
Yeah.
In any case, then in 2012, there's Rock of Ages, which I really don't know hardly anything about. I guess it's sort of a rock musical where I don't really know anything about it. Is it like it's a jukebox musical? I think right where it's not original songs. They're all playing pop music or something.
Yeah. It's like a comedy. Like I don't even remember it that much. Well,
Yeah.
it's not worth talking about.
Well, I recall people thinking it was weird to cast him in that at the time, and then it was weird when it came out, and then people didn't talk about it anymore. But then we get in 2012. Also, we get Jack Reacher, which I didn't see at the time, but watched just earlier this year, and it's pretty good.
Yep.
I think it's perhaps fair to criticize that Tom Cruise, just as a type, is very different from the way that character is described in the books. but separated from any of that question, I think he's good in that movie, and it's a good movie generally. Then in 2013, we get Oblivion, which is another like feels like a little bit like trying to go back to the Minority Report well, but it doesn't like I don't know. It doesn't. That one doesn't feel like it quite gels. It doesn't really quite know exactly what it's trying to say. It's a little too. Uh, yeah, it feels kind of insubstantial. I felt like.
Yes.
Yeah. But then in 2014, you get Edge of Tomorrow, where he's going back to the Minority Report well, in the sense of being willing to let audiences laugh at his misfortune, which is to say, it is extremely hilarious the scenes where he is dying over and over in that movie. Um, those are played for laughs very expertly, and it's a cool sci-fi action, and I like that one a lot.
It's also his first project with Doug Liman,
Oh,
who directed American Made, that we're going to
yep.
eventually get to here.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
we're we're making our way there. So after
But yes, this was where he first worked with him.
yep. So in 2015, we get Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, and that's the first one with McQuarrie, who he is continuing to work with now on all the subsequent Mission Impossible movies. But then in 2016, we get the Jack Reacher sequel, Jack Reacher Never Go Back, and it. I haven't seen it, but from what I understand, the title is perhaps instructive. Don't go back to Jack Reacher because it's not that one isn't as good. Um, but then in 2017, you get The Mummy, which is bad but fascinating. Like, did you ever see that one?
Yes.
Yeah. It's not good, but some of what it's trying for is really interesting, and there's some good stuff in it. And I think none of what's bad about it is his fault, at least not performance wise. It's definitely an example of Universal is trying to kickstart their whole dark universe thing, and it just didn't take. But some of that movie's pretty good. Like the girl who's playing the actual mummy character is pretty good. She's pretty scary in that.
Yeah.
Um, there's some fun action in there. I liked big chunks of it, but overall it just feels dumb by the end. You're just like, okay. I'm excited to keep seeing what sort of shenanigans they're going to throw on screen next, but I'm not like actually engaged. But then also in 2017, we get to American Made, which we're going to talk about now, which I had not seen, and in fact hadn't really even been aware of until we were looking at this list. Somehow this movie had completely bypassed my awareness somehow. I didn't even know about it or what it was about or who else was involved, any of that. And so, like, I was a little surprised when you suggested it just because I guess I had, wrongly concluded that because I didn't hear about it, it must be a nothing of a movie. And, but, obviously that's not really true. It's just one of those things where occasionally we have these little weird holes in our media nets, you know?
Yeah. Like
Uh,
Marvel
yeah.
for me.
So in any case, I have now watched this movie for the first time, but why don't you talk about it a little bit as we get into this one?
Yeah. So, I mean, American Made is a basically a movie. It's kind of like a black comedy. I would probably describe it that way.
Hmm.
Like, because it is humorous, like it's meant to be kind of lighthearted. But it's basically describing a the life of a TWA pilot who has been smuggling cigars and gets recruited by the CIA to like help in their South American efforts that have to do with arms and drugs, and it's all pre Iran Contra. Like it's
Hmm.
established. Like if when you first watch the movie, if you're aware of Iran Contra, you might actually feel like this is what that is. But
Yeah.
it's at the end of the movie, it does indicate that this was like the preliminary stuff that led to like the Oliver North, Reagan, like Iran Contra stuff.
Right.
This was
Right.
all this is like the prequel.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like it's establishing all the circumstances that led to them going to Iran to have them arm these particular revolutionaries.
right. And all of the oddities between how the Nicaraguans and the rebels and who needs arms and who's going to help us protect against communism and who's going to make money off of all this stuff. But basically, he plays Barry Seal, the pilot, who, while he's doing this work that he's been recruited to do by the CIA, is also very opportunistic
Mm-hmm.
and has taken on the idea of, well, if I'm going to be running drugs and guns and I'm protected by the CIA, and I can kind of build a business out of this on the side because now I have all the information of how you don't get caught,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and sort of and how he recruits his friends and his wife, and it's very much in the um anti-hero, where the guy starts off as sort of an
Yeah.
idealistic guy with a great, marriage and life, but then you can watch him be corrupted over time, and he it kind of leads himself into his own downfall, right?
Yeah.
It's like
I
good film.
I was actually just going to say that some of the elements that make it a bit like a comedy are deal with a lot of these little interstitials that come in to explain complex situations and the voiceover narration, and intercutting various different things that really made me think of The Big Short. And so even before you mentioned Goodfellas, I was about to say the movie is almost like The Big Short crossed with Goodfellas.
With a little bit of like blow
Yeah,
thrown in
well,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
certainly you need like that piece of it, but like stylistically,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean the whole how you be a normal guy corrupted by drug running and then end up in these bad situations that happens in
Mm-hmm.
Blow is very much like this, but it doesn't treat it with the same like over dramatic
Mm-hmm.
like there's a heavy handedness to Blow that isn't in this movie, which is why you compare it to The Big Short. But the character arc is actually probably even a little bit more elevated than Blow and is more like Goodfellas. Yeah.
I kind of liked the sort of cheerful satire nihilism about the CIA in this movie, about how they're depicted, because it's kind of at the same time that our main CIA guy, played by Domhnall Gleeson, uh, is depicted more or less like every time we see him at work, he's like in a cube farm, and he
Yep.
wears these cheesy like short sleeve dress shirts and a tie at work. And you get the feeling that like you'll cut to him once and there'll be a slice of somebody's birthday cake on sitting on his desk, like that sort of stuff. Like, and then he shows up and and he's arranging for all of these things, but at the same time, like there's a lot of just, for example, it's very transparent that Barry, Tom Cruise's character, getting involved with all of the drugs and everything, like the CIA did not tell him to do it, but it's clear that they were manipulating him into that position, right? It's kind of like, first of all, they recruit a guy who's already been smuggling, so they have blackmail on him. And then there's a bit where they're saying, "Hey, yeah, you're doing a great job for us, and we're giving you increasingly dangerous assignments." And he says, "Well, can I get more money for this?" It's like, "No, you'll figure something out." Like they don't know exactly what that's going to be.
What he's
And
going to figure out. Well, because it's
yeah,
exactly that's the only way that the whole thing is going to work is
yeah,
that the Nicaraguans are only going to let him do what he's doing if he's running their drugs for them.
right. So like so what we see, and it's very transparent for us the viewer, even though I think it's not as obvious to Barry in the moment, is of course they know he's going to do all of the drug smuggling too. It was always their plan that he would, but they're just making sure that they don't ever officially tell him to do it, and they pretend to look the other way, but it's also that they can burn him at a moment's notice. If he gets busted, they say, "Oh, no, he's a drug smuggler, not anything to do with us." right? Like it's
Literally burn everything that has to do with him.
yeah, like it, they have special bags for it.
Yes.
um, but it's fascinating though, because at the same time that he is becoming incredibly cash rich to the point where it's actually a problem for him to figure out where to put all of the cash, because he can't take it to a bank because it's drug money.
Yeah. A
So
concept that Ozark lifted from
yeah.
this movie for sure.
Well, yeah, I haven't watched Ozark, but that's my understanding as well. Is just this idea of like, well, you can't put it in the bank; it's all illegal. But you're getting,
You can't launder it fast enough.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're literally having it. You have so much cash that not only is it not like helpful, it actually starts to become a negative. It's actually a problem that you have so much that you have to figure out where you can even put it, much less have any idea how you could ever spend that much. And to the point where, like, it's part of what causes the whole downfall is because they can't hide it well enough to keep his dumbass brother-in-law from stealing some of it and then spending ostentatiously and getting himself busted by the local sheriff, played by Jesse Plemons for no reason. I say for no reason, just because he is a big enough recognizable actor in a nothing role. Like he's got like something like 4 minutes of screen time, I think. I like Jesse Plemons. This is not a criticism. It's just it feels like a role that, if they had not cast a name actor in it, would have not needed to exist in the script at all. Like, yeah. So it's not a criticism. It's just weird because there's a lot of time where we see him just at the barber shop in this little town saying, I don't know, that seems a little weird. This scene only exists to justify my presence later in the movie. But it's just watching Tom Cruise and his family
Okay.
expand their empire in this way at the same time that Schaefer, this CIA handler, is still sitting at the same cube farm, even though it's obvious to us, the viewer, that Barry is being set up to have exactly the same kind of crash and burn downfall that's all too obvious, and being manipulated into that position completely by the guy with all the real power, who is nonetheless the guy in this cheesy short sleeve dress shirt sitting at the cube farm.
Yep.
And I really liked this sort of cheerful cynicism about that whole plot line.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of what I enjoy about this movie is that it's told with like these weird like happy beats to it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but you're right. It's super nihilistic. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
super.
Well, that's a lot of what made me think of The Big Short again, like just stylistically. I mean, I feel like it has to. It's almost wearing that influence on its sleeve, like especially with the introduction with these weird little animated interstitials showing the political situation and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and tonally. Although that stuff kind of falls off in the second half of the movie, there's not as much of it. But like, I mean, on the whole, I thought it was pretty good. We've got uh, I think it's pretty good. Maybe I don't know that it necessarily all comes together as solidly as maybe they would have wanted it to. Like it's good. Like there's nothing about it that's bad, and yet, I mean, it didn't seem to. It kind of came and went in the media landscape.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that is because of the odd tone that it has. Like
Yeah.
it's talking about something that was super serious, like
Mm-hmm.
the precursor to the Iran Contra, and it's told with this sort of jovial, like, hey, isn't this look at these scoundrels.
Yeah.
You know, like
Look at the stuff that our government did not too long ago. Pretty fucked up, right?
yeah, yeah. Look at what it did to this guy.
Uh
You
huh.
know, take a load of that. You know,
Yeah. So it is definitely a weird tone in that regard. And I wonder if, well, I don't know, because on the one hand, like there is The Big Short, which kind of became a sensation, but I think part of that is because it finally explained that whole situation in a way that, you know, that stuff mattered to people, but they didn't really know how to understand it all, and it actually explained some of those things in a sort of entertaining way. But I think it also sort of wore on its sleeve that it's half documentary, you know? Like
right,
it's, but whereas this feels maybe a little bit like it's kind of trying to do that and also be, because like it's telling stories about real stuff, but it's also not like Barry Seal, the actual human being, did all of the things depicted in this movie, and it's all factual in that regard, right?
right.
There's a lot of it that's fictionalized, and and I think that maybe them trying to split the difference there led to it not connecting really in either on either side. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I also think the fact that what they were tapping into was 30 years old,
Hmm.
whereas what The Big Short was tapping into was like 5 years old.
Yeah.
You know, so that you had a relevancy to it that this movie is only kind of works like if you weren't around for the Iran Contra or like even like aware of it, like which I mean we were barely right, we were young when it happened, but we're familiar with what that was and what happened and like kind of the drug, all
Hmm.
that piece of it. If you're used to like Narcos, this movie doesn't like it just doesn't hit.
Yeah.
So your audience is already limited because the thing that it's trying to do misses a lot of people, and then it, the people that it is trying to hit with it, there's only so many of them that enjoy this kind of lighthearted take on it, right? Like so
Yeah.
you're
Well, it's also like how are you selling this movie, right?
right.
Because I feel like in some respects uh, you're really you do end up in a little bit of a tricky situation where you're not making an apolitical movie, but you're also not willing to kind of completely declare your your stakes. You're kind of being like that sort of cheerful cynicism. I ultimately enjoyed, but that's a very specific flavor that's not necessarily going to have wide appeal. But and
There's a very select group of Gen X that
yeah.
like this movie
Yeah.
like hits home with, and like we
Well,
are there,
right.
right?
Yeah. The people who are old enough to remember that there was a thing called the Iran Contra scandal and also young enough to be willing to have this sort of a cheerfully cynical attitude about it. It is a
Right.
very sort of Gen X attitude sort of thing.
Yes.
Well, and it's also true that even Adam McKay has struggled to repeat the chemistry that made Big Short so successful. Because we talked about that when we did the Oscars this year, but like Vice certainly not as good as The Big Short, and then I hated Don't Look Up. Um, I just whew. So it's just that's an elusive chemistry is the point, I guess, and so like anyone trying to repeat it, and overall, I mean, I feel like American Made is pretty good. I can just see why it wouldn't necessarily capture a wide audience.
Yeah.
Hmm. I don't know. Anything else to say about that before we kind of just touch on
No, I mean, I feel
last
like
couple movies?
yeah, we talked so much about the other ones, but I wanted you to watch it because I knew you hadn't seen it,
Oh
and I
yeah,
knew
no, I'm glad I did for sure.
and it has just an interesting place in the Tom Cruise scape
Hmm.
because it it's not against type, but it like it's
It's
very much it's against type to what he's doing now, right?
Well,
And
I think what it does is it's kind of a neat synthesis of some of his different things. Because on the one hand, Barry Seal very much is the sort of charming scoundrel that he has played a million times.
yeah, I mean, he's kind of Ethan Hunt as the bad guy, like, or as not a bad guy, but as like
Well,
the pilot
like
drug dealer,
yeah,
right?
but it's also willing to like not only he is certainly doing a lot of things that are like pretty like not even morally gray, but pretty unambiguously like not only illegal but also immoral
Yeah.
for pure financial gain, right? There's not even really any other thing to it. It's not like he accidentally falls into it and does it because his family's in danger or something like that. It gets to the point where he's making so much money, it's a problem. And yet he doesn't stop or slow down or take that as a sign that maybe he shouldn't,
Nope.
or he could relax a little bit. Nope. Keep on going. But it simultaneously, though, has him being that sort of charming scoundrel who is also doing bad stuff, but also having just a little bit of that having to constantly scramble energy that we talked about with like Minority Report, say, right? Because he is constantly having to solve the next problem that has arisen from his poorly conceived plan, right? Like now he's getting away with it because he's smart and talented and has the CIA giving him a lot of backing. But he's having to constantly try to solve problems through his charm and everything. It's just one of those things occasionally where you have to say, um, "Oh, you know what? Actually, did you ever end up watching Licorice Pizza?"
Mm-mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, there is a sequence, and I'll try not to get too spoilery about it, where a character has. We've just had a gripping, tense sequence where a character has had to do something really difficult under very stressful circumstances, and then they end up pulling it off. But there's a moment as soon as they're safe where they're just kind of taking a moment to say, what am I doing with my life? I should not have been in this situation at all. This is I've made some really poor decisions that led to me even being in this situation. I'm not going to allow myself to be happy that worked out because I shouldn't have even been here. Right? And so that's there's a great sequence in Licorice Pizza where that's the energy, and so that was just what I was thinking here is like by the time that Barry Seal has had to land his little plane on a suburban road and crash it into somebody's front yard and emerge from the wreck of his plane covered with cocaine and giving a wad of cash to a kid in exchange for his bicycle, you start feeling like, so Barry, you feel like this is going well for you right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it seems like this is not great.
I know, but it's funny at the
Yeah.
same time. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
so like light. Yeah, it's a weird tone, but I mean, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
It's what I love about like some Doug Liman movies,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like Go. I mean,
Oh
that
yeah.
was one of my
Go
favorites.
is
Yeah,
great. Oh, I love Go.
yeah. But anyway,
But yeah, so yeah, it was pretty good. I'm glad we watched it. But yeah, so let's just round out Tom Cruise with in 2018. Of course, we get the most recent of the Mission Impossible movies, Fallout. And then there's a gap because he's making movies that are also being delayed by the pandemic. Because the movie that comes next was actually mostly shot before the pandemic, but then gets delayed for obvious reasons. But then finally comes out in 2022, Top Gun Maverick, and makes a bajillion dollars, and now everybody wants to make their own version because it's good. I mean, it's the same. It's the Mission Impossible crew in there, right? It's uh, uh, hang on, I'm pulling it up. But the so it's not McQuarrie directing, but I think he's also producing still. Um, but in any case, he's Tom Cruise is doing a lot of the producing, and it's following a lot of the same sort of chemistry that he's been using in the Mission Impossible movies, which is to say, let's try whenever possible to have a real thing happening on screen and not just have everything be CGI.
Yep.
Let's try to show people what they've never seen before, which is these jets doing these incredible things from angles that we've never seen without it being CGI because it was always too hard to do. Let's figure out how to do that. Let's try to figure out how we can have our actual actors in the actual cockpits of these planes reacting as the planes do these stunts. And like that's ambitious, but it's very much the sort of energy that Tom Cruise has been going for with the latter Mission Impossible movies. But then they also just got a great script, right? Like I don't even really necessarily know how much Maverick from Top Gun Maverick necessarily obviously maps to Maverick from the original Top Gun, but it's close enough that it works just fine. That movie's great. Great script, well made, and the fact that it's, you know, uh, it annoys me that they, like I don't hate it in the movie, but it definitely does that. Um, let's make the enemies be kind of indistinct so that we don't have to deal with any real world politics. Just enough that people can say that it's anti woke, even though that makes no sense. It's just not. It's not.
Oh,
Woke.
that's definitely a thing.
Oh yeah, I mean there are lots of people who are proclaiming, see, this movie's doing so great because it doesn't cater to the woke crowd,
Oh
and
yeah,
that
there's a lot of people saying that.
yeah that really annoys me. Although it's like it does feel like some of those people really pick and choose about what they decide is woke and what's not, because it also has the diverse team of young pilots that Maverick is training. You know, like why is that not woke? I don't know. It's because they wanted to claim this one instead of protest it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it's same with the terminal list.
yeah.
You know,
But it definitely does that same thing that the original does, which is or just the idea of having the actual geopolitics of what this crisis is be kind of unclear, right? Um, like we're it's a rogue nuclear weapons processing facility. We shouldn't let them do it, but exactly who's running it and what the politics of that are, well, let's pretend that doesn't matter. And it doesn't. In the case of this movie, the movie is very functional without any of that, but it's also very clearly done deliberately to try to avoid people having to think about that stuff to the movie's benefit, but also allowing certain people to try to claim it in that way, which is annoying, but not really. That's the fault of our politics, not really the movie.
correct.
But yeah, it's great. Top Gun Maverick is great. People should go see it if they haven't. Although a lot of people have already, so maybe they know. But then just looking at his IMDb here, that we've now covered all of the things that have been released, but we've of course got the two-part Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, Part 1 and Part 2, which are continuing there. And then after that, we have Untitled Tom Cruise / SpaceX Project, which who knows what that is. But it seems very much in line with some of what Tom Cruise likes to do in terms of trying to actually show stuff happening, right? But
Yep.
And then of course there's also an announced Live, Die, Repeat, and Repeat, which is I guess a sequel to Edge of Tomorrow, which we didn't really get into, but Edge of Tomorrow being perhaps not an extra great title and getting rebranded on video releases, Live, Die, Repeat, which is frankly a much better title, which I think is why they would have the sequel there. But yeah, so that's where Tom Cruise is at. But I just mean it's one of those things where, boy, before Top Gun Maverick came out, we it's not like Tom Cruise was a fading star or anything, but he was very much the Mission Impossible guy now, right? Whereas Top Gun Maverick comes out and it's like, oh, now he's just mega huge leading man movie star again. I mean,
Yeah.
he's still making the movies that he wants to make, but it's just one of those things where hard to argue he can't open a movie.
No, it does, and it's funny because it makes you that much more excited for the new Mission Impossibles.
Yeah. I mean, I was already plenty excited for the new Mission Impossibles because I like those, but I mean, it
Me
doesn't
too. But
hurt.
once I
Yeah.
saw him like crush this one, it was like, yeah, all right, this will be fun.
It shows that he doesn't have only the one card to play.
Correct.
All right, so I think that wraps up our Tom Cruise series. So
Does.
let's talk a little bit about our next series and something that I think we had discussed conceptually, but without actually picking the specific movies. But are we in agreement then that our next series will be the Muppet movies?
Yes.
Yes. I think that. Hang on, I'm trying to. We got to pull up a list and decide which of the Muppet movies we're doing because we have, of course, several eras of Muppet movies, right? Because we've got the original kind of series of them. We've got where there was the Muppet movie, the Great Muppet Caper, and the Muppets Take Manhattan. But then we get a lot of the like middle era ones where we get like Muppet Christmas Carol, Muppet Treasure Island, Muppets from Space. But there's a Muppet Wizard of Oz, I think. But then, of course, there's also the more recent The Muppets and The Muppets Most Wanted. And then I think there's a half dozen other miscellaneous things that like could be TV movies or whatever. And of course, there was the TV shows, but I think we're focused on the movies. But I don't know. Do you have immediate thoughts about should we like pick one from each of those eras, so to speak? What do you think?
I mean, I think we should probably watch the original Muppets just to,
The Muppet movie from
yep.
1979. Yeah.
Um,
What do you think? Christmas Carol or Treasure Island?
that's what I was gonna say. We need to pick one of the odd ones. I honestly,
I've watched Christmas Carol more recently, but it's also really great.
yeah. So is Treasure Island, though.
I mean, they're both good. I like both. I would be fine with either. I was just kind of saying that it's like um, Christmas Carol I have watched more recently, but simultaneously that doesn't make me not want to pick it. You know what I mean?
I mean, I kind of want to watch Treasure Island.
Okay. Yeah. All right, let's do that. So the Muppet movie, Muppet Treasure Island, and I'm going to suggest that we do Muppets Most Wanted rather than The Muppets, partly because I actually haven't seen it. I kept always meaning to and then never got around to it. And so I would vote for that one.
Yeah, that's a more recent one because
Yeah,
I was going to say
that's the most recent film. Yeah. So it's kind of a continuation from The Muppets, but I think it's a little bit more like an actual Muppet movie, whereas The Muppets obviously is a Muppet movie. I just mean it's almost like also a Jason Segel comedy. You know what I mean? Where it's like almost as much about that as it is The Muppets, whereas The Muppets Most Wanted is kind of more central on The Muppets. But also, I haven't seen that one, so I will watch it regardless. But how about those three? What do you think?
yep, original Muppets,
Yep.
Treasure
So
Island,
the Muppet movie, the first one from
yeah,
1979.
the original movie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
Treasure
then
Island, Muppets Most Wanted.
sounds good. All right. So thank you everyone for listening and or watching, and we will be back to talk about the Muppets soon. In the meantime, it's time to start the music. It's time to light the lights. But in the meantime, watch good movies.
Yep.